Well, let's do this thing. So, here's what we're going to talk about. I was asked, where's the Reeve article that I sent out? I didn't send it. I didn't want to overwhelm you. No, I didn't create an article, so I did not send it. But guess what? For the next 25 minutes, we're going to do the article. So for the next 25 minutes, we're going to talk about the Reeve. All right, so Revelation. Chapter 4 and chapter 5, they're a unit. It is a divine council scene that utilizes the covenant lawsuit genre from the Old Testament. So there's super solid consensus of Old Testament scholarship behind this. So what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes, 25 minutes, is we're going to interact with 3 dissertations that have been published into very expensive books, too expensive to buy. And I hope I can remember to keep us on track with these. There are the 3 dissertations. Alan Bandy's dissertation, The Prophetic Lawsuit in the Book of Revelation. Now, Bandy is an evangelical. We track with him. Bandy is then going to reference dissertations by R. Dean Davis, which is the heavenly court scene in Revelation 4 and 5. Davis is an Adventist, so we're going to depart from him in places. And then the third source is Mira Z. Kinsky, Trying Man, Trying God, the Divine Courtroom in Early Jewish and Christian Literature. Kinsky is a Jewish religious follower. So this lesson has got some very, very long quotes from all these scholars. I put the full quotes into your PowerPoint into the notes section. And I'm just not going to read them all. I don't want to put you to sleep. So, you've got the notes. You can go back at your leisure and dig into the deeper ingredients if you choose to. Now, some scholars argue that the entire book of Revelation draws from this genre. Now, we're going to lean heavily on Bandy's dissertation to show how this covenant lawsuit genre is utilized and repurposed in the book of Revelation. So, when you hear the word lawsuit, I want you to think of a courtroom scene. Now, not all of Revelation belongs in this covenant structure, this covenant genre, but various parts of the book do. They construct scenes like it's a lawsuit in a courtroom. You probably watch these TV dramas at home. You're used to this. So, Revelation chapters 4 and 5 is the most prominent use of this covenant lawsuit genre. Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy chapters 28 through 30. So you guys can help me out a little bit too. If you see me pick this up and do that and nothing changes, tell me, because my little wireless deal is down in the bottom of the thing back there, and that's how we'll get messed up, and you'll be like, what is he talking about? Those slides don't match. Okay, so Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28 and 30 serve as the Old Testament backdrop. Bandy cites a work by a guy named Chilton, and his insight is that, now, get this, he says the 4 series of 7 judgments in Revelation, all right, okay, I can count 3. Seals, trumpets, bowls. Who knows what the 4th one is? I don't have a clue. Bonus points if you can figure it out. Either that or this is just a bad typo in the literature. So I know we got 3 series. He says 4. Can't figure out what the 4th one is. Of the 7 judgments in Revelation, they're based on Bill? Ooh, the letters. Ding, 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 ding. We have a winner. Way to go. That just totally makes sense. It'll make a lot more sense in about 8 or 10 minutes. But yeah, there you go. Get that man a hot dog. So, God lays out his blessings for covenant faithfulness, encouragement, like in the letters to the 7 churches. And then if the covenant is violated, then you're cursed according to these passages. Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28 and 29 are used in the Old Testament quite a bit as the basis for Israel's courtroom prosecution. God gets upset at Israel's apostasy, and then the prophet will put Israel in a courtroom scene where God begins to build a case against his people for their covenant violations. See, this is going to explain why the Assyrians come and conquer you, Israel, why the Babylonians come and conquer you, Israel. Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28 and 29 are Torah. It's part of the law. It's part of the covenant that God made with Israel. Covenant violations then become the basis for God's judgment. So one of the questions we need to be thinking of, if the fourth series is the 7 letters, what are the covenant violations we're violating? Because all those letters go to all the churches for all time. Right? Yay. So this covenant lawsuit genre as courtroom is articulating a courtroom case, and boom. God is the judge. Often the divine counsel, when I say divine counsel in this context, I'm talking about the loyal heavenly host. Never rebellious heavenly host, but only the heavenly host, the loyal ones. They're the jury participating in concert with God, who in many cases is also the jury. In fact, sometimes Yahweh is judge, jury, and executioner, prosecutor, and executioner. Bandy writes of Davis's study in Revelation 4 and 5, he attempts to portray, one, a covenant. Oh, it's on your screen. The yellow words are the ones you want to focus on. A covenant context with a temple setting. Think of God's throne room. 2, heavenly court scene involving the divine counsel. 3, an investigative type judgment of the Lamb in corporate solidarity with his people. So Davis isolates 5 themes evident in chapters 4 through 5. They're listed at the bottom in yellow, the A, B, C, D, E on your slide, so you've got that. But the important thing for us about Davis's work is he's bringing the divine counsel front and center, the God's throne room front and center into the picture. So Bandy, citing Davis again, says that Davis reviews 1 Kings 22. We've been there before. We're going to spend some time there tonight. Isaiah 6, Ezekiel chapters 1 through 11, and Daniel 7. We've spent a lot of time in Daniel 7. We're going to be back in Daniel 7 tonight. Those are these significant Old Testament passages for interpreting the role of the divine counsel, the heavenly beings, in Revelation 4 and 5. Davis argues that in the covenant lawsuit, that Yahweh functions as both prosecutor and judge. The divine counsel, sometimes like the Son of Man in Daniel 7, will serve as a witness or a vindicator, a mediator, an intercessor, or an advocate before God. The counsel's primary function is executive judicial decision making. So the counsel passes judgment based on the covenant, and the verdict is followed by subsequent actions. So in certain passages, you see divine counsel participation in the decision-making process. In other places, the counsel carries out the decisions that were made. So let's go to 1 Kings chapter 22, verses 19 to 23. Those of you who did Between Two Edens, we went through this one in detail. It's time for King Ahab to die. Ahab is the most wicked, idolatrous king in Israel's history. So God has already decreed that Ahab has got to go. The council is called together, and God says, well, how do you suppose we ought to do that? Let's hear what you propose. Well, the spirits go back and forth, and one spirit steps forward and he says, hey, I got an idea. I'll go be a lying spirit in the mouth of all of his prophets. God says, yep, that'll work. I know Ahab pretty well. He's going to be toast when you try that on him. So that's the participatory element. Now, the dissertations overview how the heavenly court works, and some of the stuff in these dissertations is speculative, but still, even though some of it's speculative, it's some really good stuff, some really good data. Kinsky, this is the lady, Jewish lady. Throughout the Hebrew Bible, there are images of God holding trial and acting in a judicial capacity. In Psalm 50, the framework is poetic, leaving us to kind of fill in the narrative setting. Other texts imagine God's heavenly courtroom intersecting with a human courtroom on the ground. Sometimes the courtroom imagery is found for the purposes of consolation, of comfort, or hope. Other times, the courtroom framework is used to provoke shame and regret and repentance. So, the divine courtroom in the Hebrew Bible is not always visible to the naked eye. Only an understanding of the divine courtroom as a deeply ingrained feature of the religious imagination of the ancient Israelite can reveal the importance of these texts. Kinsky says, if you know how ingrained this was in the religious and cultural understanding of the people of ancient Israel, well, then you're going to read other passages where a courtroom setting is not spelled out, and you're just going to sense that's what's going on, like Bill did, the letters. It's actually the first round. But good job. All right, so Reeve. So it's in Hebrew, it's R-I-B. But it's one of those languages where when the B kind of looks like this, has a dot in the middle called a dagesh, then it's a V sound. So it's a reeve. Kinsky's dissertation gets into what Hebrew terminology would call the reeve pattern. So reeve is a word, it means dispute, it means lawsuit, or quarrel. So this is the covenant lawsuit idea, the reeve pattern or reeve genre. Here we go. Let's go, there we go. One time. All right. So, Kinsky's dissertation gets into what this is. Lawsuit, reeve pattern, quarrel. The divine courtroom appears in the Hebrew Bible through a prophetic lawsuit or a reeve pattern form of prophetic speech. So, the prophet indicates that the people of Israel, he indicts the people of Israel for various crimes against God, all of which ultimately lead up to a breach of the covenant that they have with God. And so for the prophets, this justifies God's intention to punish the people for their misdeeds. So the prophets use legal language as a means of expressing God's formal complaints and his right as a litigant and an injured party. And it shows how God's actions are and his functions are part of divine justice. So, now as we think back, and as Bill has already helped us see, the 7 letters to the 7 churches start to make a lot more sense now. Jesus said, I have this against you. It's a violation of our new covenant agreement with the Lord. Now, there's some things you're doing well, some accommodations, but there's some things you're not doing well. All right, Kinsky uses a template example of Micah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. So in Micah 6, this is where Micah indicts the southern kingdom of Judah for social injustice and ethical improprieties. So this is a typical courtroom scene where God is putting Israel on trial. So the word case up there on the top in the yellow is the Hebrew word reeve. So it's that legal term. So when you see that term as a Hebrew reader, by the way, those of you who have, every one of you have Logos if you open up your Bible, and I can help you with this after the class, show you how to open up your reverse interlinear. With one click, you can see the Hebrew word or Greek word behind all the words and do a word study with a simple click of a button on your mouse. So you see that Hebrew word. Well, you know, okay, this is a lawsuit. It's lawsuit terminology. God is about to bring a case here against his people. So the text says, arise, plead your case, your reeve before the mountains. Let the hills hear your voice. Hear the mountains. Hear, you mountains, the indictment, that's the reeve, there it is again, of the Lord, and you enduring foundations of the earth. For the Lord has an indictment, there's reeve again, against his people, and he will contend with Israel. So here in Micah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, we've got a reeve, a prophetic lawsuit against the people of Israel. Charges are given by Yahweh against the people. For I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery, and I sent you before Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord. So we've got all these abuses that are happening throughout chapter 6 in Micah. So what is it that the Lord really wants? Does he want you to bring sacrifices? Does he want you to bow down with your calves and the firstborn of your rams? No! He's told you what to do. He's told you what is good, to love justice, do justice, love hesed, that's that believing loyalty idea, and to walk humbly with your God. So Micah chapter 6 verses 1 through 8 lays out the case against the people with legal language and courtroom jargon. The reader should know instantly, all right, Judah is on trial. Sometimes the settings occur in divine council scenes where God's enthroned in his heavenly temple. The heavenly temple is God's house. So these elements play out in a lot of scenes. God is the prosecutor and judge, and some cases even the jury. Again, divine council members, they're going to play different roles. Davis summarizes this. The members of the divine council fulfill several different functions. Sometimes they praise and adore the head of the council. They participate in the council proceedings. They give counsel. They promote justice among the peoples. They serve as guardians or watchers, messengers of the decision. They're an intercessor, witness, or advocate for the faithful. In Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 through 14, the Son of Man appears to serve as the witness or intercessor on behalf of the saints, the holy ones of the Most High, and the people of the saints of the Most High. So the first one are supernatural beings. Second one are people, the saints of the Most High. So in Theodore Mullen's classic study of the divine council, he says in Hebrew thought, Yahweh there we go. In Hebrew thought, Yahweh functions as both prosecutor and judge when a negative judgment is rendered in the frequent Old Testament reeve lawsuit context. Mullen observes that in all the major council scenes, it's the 1 Kings 22, Isaiah 6, Ezekiel 1 through 11, and Daniel 7, the head of the council is seated on a throne. So God, the king judge, is attended by various members of the heavenly host, and sometimes they're also seated. Daniel 7, we've talked about this previously. The thrones, plural, were set in place. Isaiah and Ezekiel situate the throne inside the temple for these judgment scenes. So think temple, that's where God rules from. So there's evidence in Daniel 4, Daniel 7, 1 Kings 22 of participation in the decision making in the council. I had a ball, I'd spike it. All right. Bandy's dissertation says, if you have all that stuff in your head and you look at Revelation chapter 4 and 5, you're going to notice parallels. First, God is described as the head of the divine council in terms drawn directly from the Old Testament. Secondly, the 24 elders function in a capacity similar to the divine council in the Old Testament. Examples would be Isaiah 24:23, Yahweh among his elders. Third, the 7 spirits of God, the 4 living creatures, John the strong angel, the Lamb, the myriad of angels, and every creature in the cosmos could all be classified as members of the divine council. And then fourth, just the very judicial nature of the scroll itself. So, Bandy summarizes this. The letters to the 7 churches constitute lawsuit speeches, whereby, this is part of your cookies on the bottom shelf right here, Jesus is conducting a forensic examination of his covenant people. That's you, that's me, that's us, that's all churches, all time, across the globe. They're prophetic oracles similar to the Old Testament prophets. So Revelation follows the pattern of the Old Testament prophetic lawsuit that begins with the people of God. Judgment begins with the house of God first. The judgments and the promises and the 7 letters remain contingent upon, it's contingent upon what the churches do in response to the oracles, to the letters. How you and I respond to the content of the letters. What are some of the things that the letters challenged us with? Don't be lukewarm.
Wake up.
Wake up. You're dead. Overcome. Conquer. Rekindle your first love. Go back and do the things you did at first. Well, the remaining vision, especially the interludes that we're going to get to as we go forward through the letter, they relate to how the churches respond. Well, these churches that got the letter originally got it how many years ago? Around 2000. So stuff way in the future, chapters 11 and 14 and 13 and 16 and 17 relate to how they respond. So has this stuff been going on for 2,000 years, or is it all future?
Yes.
Already, but not yet fully. It's already started. And if it started 2,000 years ago, what does that mean for us? It's going on now. All right, let's keep going. So the remaining vision, just repeating myself here, especially the interludes, relates to how Christ Fellowship, churches today, respond. They're to faithfully endure as witnesses during the heightened state of persecution. And then once the Lord deals with his people, then he turns his attention to the surrounding nations with oracles of judgment against them. All right, this is a pattern established by the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 32. So once the covenant people, once you and I repent and obey, Yahweh promises to exact vengeance on Israel's enemies, on our enemies, on the pagans. Now that's coming directly out of Deuteronomy 32:43, in the song of the Song of Moses, that he's going to exact vengeance on Israel's enemies. But it's following the same pattern in Revelation, so it'd be vengeance on our enemies or those who are oppressing us. So Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, we've talked about this one a lot already in the few weeks we've been doing this, is the disinheritance of the nations. Following that, Yahweh takes Israel as his own prized possession. And then in verse 17 of Deuteronomy 32, they begin to worship, Israel does, the Shadim. Okay, it's translated demons in the Old Testament. So the Hebrew word is the Shadim. And it says, you're worshiping the Shadim, gods that you had not known. And we talked about this is the one place where the ESV doesn't have the best translation. So we touched on the NASB, New American Standard Bible. Gods not Yahweh. You're worshiping gods that are not Yahweh. So, side note, little rabbit trail here. The Hebrew word shadim in the Old Testament, that's translated demons, these are territorial supernatural rulers. These are geopolitical rulers in the Old Testament context. These are the ones put over the nations at Babel. Now, what you and I think of when we think of the word demons, particularly New Testament, is a totally different species. First, they are typically classified as evil spirits or unclean spirits in the New Testament, in the Gospels. And according to scores of Second Temple literature, in fact, this is the Second Temple literature. Remember, we're 500 BC to 70 AD. So you got about 570 years of writings. There's a lot of variation and a lot of contradictions in there. But the one thing that all the writing is unanimously agreed upon is this. These unclean spirits in the New Testament are the disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim, Genesis 6, 1 through 4, and their offspring, the giant clans. So in the writings, Second Temple period writings, those spirits are not 100% Elohim. They're not beings that predate the creation. And they're not 100% human. Second Temple literature calls them quasi-human, quasi-divine spirits. Part human, part Elohim. So we're going to cover that in a little more depth later on when we get to one of the trumpet judgments. But 2 Peter, Jude, Paul, all speak in a way that could align with that thinking. In fact, Jesus does some things that align with that thinking. While it's not explicitly spelled out in the New Testament, that is what an ancient Jewish person believed. All right, let's go back to Deuteronomy 32. Okay, once you shift from the Babel event to an indictment of Israel for apostasy, what Bandy is saying is that in Revelation, you get these oracles, these letters to the 7 churches, where the people of God are being evaluated, being judged, and in some cases they're being commended. And that carries through all the way through the rest of the book. How do God's people respond to what happens in the first 3 chapters in these letters? Do they hold fast under persecution? Do they refuse to be disloyal to Yahweh? Do they stay on mission? Even to the point of death? Because that's what these churches were facing. It's what churches face today all over the world. Believers, do you remain loyal even to the point of death? Okay, once God's people are dealt with, then all of a sudden the attention shifts to the judgment of the nations. And at the end, ultimately, there will be a healing of all the nations. Remember Genesis 12, 1 through 3, Abraham's blessed to be a blessing. All the nations will be blessed through him. So what we have here in Revelation is it's following the exact pattern of Deuteronomy 32. So you've got this flow of Deuteronomy 32. Yahweh takes Israel as his own. Israel apostatizes. They go follow other gods. God deals with Israel. Then in Deuteronomy 32:43, God starts taking revenge against the other nations. So this is the pattern of the lawsuit that we see in Deuteronomy 32. Bandy writes, Revelation sounds a note of judgment pertaining to the churches. Say that again. There is judgment pertaining to the churches. That would be us, you and me. But then, the remaining contents of the vision pertain to the judgment of the nations. The judgment of the nations is vengeance for their treatment against the saints, against Yahweh's people. So, let's summarize. Revelation chapters 1 through 3 is both a lawsuit dealing with the followers of Jesus, dealing with us, personalize it, you and me. We get warnings, and in some cases there is an indictment, and in some cases we get commended for things we're doing well. So it's a lawsuit. It is a courtroom evaluation of the followers of Jesus. At the same time, it's building a case, a reeve against the nations. Because some of the churches that are the recipients of these letters, have been faithful. They've endured under persecution and endured under suffering at the hands of the nations. The judgments and promises announced for the churches in the 7 letters, they remain contingent upon what we do in response to the oracles, in response to the letters. All right, there are 14 parallels in Daniel 7 and Revelation 4 and 5 in the exact same order. So, scholars, Beale and Carson, lay out the courtroom setting of Revelation 4 and 5 in 14 steps that parallels exactly the divine council courtroom scene in Daniel 7. So if you begin in Daniel 7, 9 through 28, and you observe the elements in order of their presentation, you're going to see a striking resemblance. It starts with an introductory vision phraseology. Next, you've got thrones in heaven. Then you've got God sitting on the throne. You've got God's appearance on the throne. You've got fire before the throne. You've got heavenly servants. You've got books. You've got the opening of the books. A divine figure comes and receives authority to reign over a kingdom forever. This kingdom includes all peoples of all nations and tongues. Then you have the seer's emotional distress at the vision. And then the seer receives heavenly counsel. Saints are given divine authority to reign over a kingdom, and they both conclude with God's eternal reign. So there are 14 specific parallels between Daniel 7, Revelation 4 and 5 in the same order. So let's have some cookies. Daniel 7 is a divine council scene. John is riffing off of Daniel 7 in Revelation chapters 4 and 5. What we have in Revelation 4 and 5 is a covenant lawsuit. It's a divine council lawsuit scene, and it is very deliberate. So, the council of heaven, with the sovereign God at its head, decides to meet to decide. There's 3 things. This is it. The fate of the world, the vindication of the followers of Jesus, and the judgment of the wicked. That's what we're going to see in the rest of the letter. Fate of the world, vindication of the followers of Jesus, and the judgment of the nations, the wicked. So the content of Revelation chapter 4 onward constitutes a series of council-decreed judgments that will culminate in the final judgment of Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 15 at the great white throne. So, covenant lawsuit genre. It's a prophetic lawsuit. It's a covenant lawsuit treaty. These are just various words for it. It's about Yahweh, who is judge and sometimes jury, sometimes the prosecutor. Often there's a divine council, supernatural beings loyal to Yahweh, and as the jury, and sometimes they participate with God. Within the covenant lawsuit genre, its primary function is executive judicial decision making. They pass judgment based on the covenant, violations and faithfulness, commendation, judgment. And on that basis, a verdict is followed by subsequent actions. So your reeve it's a courtroom scene. It's a throne room scene. It is God's sovereign rule and his oversight. God is judge of all things. Now in chapter 1, Jesus has been described with the Ancient of Days terminology. All right, Revelation chapters 4 and 5. What we have is a divine council courtroom scene to do three things: decide the fate of the world, vindicate the followers of Jesus, and it's the judgment of the wicked, which will be what we see in chapters 6 through 22. So, how does the covenant lawsuit genre impact your view of the 7 letters to the churches now? It's personal. It impacts your view because those letters become personal. It's just not those churches 2,000 years ago, but it's us today. Those 7 churches have been, yes, as it's only judgment on earth. Yeah. What were some of the things that were the judgments? Like, what was the scariest one? Do you remember? So Jezebel, what was? Let's start with Jezebel then. Jezebel referenced what? She was a metaphor for sexual immorality and idolatry. Same with the Nicolaitans and Balaam, sexual immorality and idolatry. Those are 2 of the big ones through the letters. The other one is not doing evangelism, not being on mission. The Great Commission, that was huge. And what did Jesus say he would come and do? He's going to snatch something away. Take your lampstand away. And what's that? Your guardian spirit, your supernatural being who's there to protect you, who's there to assist you, who's there to help you. You'll be left on your own. And all those churches are gone now.
He really comes against the Laodiceans for their self-sufficiency.
He comes against the Laodiceans for their self-sufficiency, not relying on him. What we do in the flesh profits nothing. Yeah, I would think so. It's the same message for all churches, for all time, globally. This is written, yes, it was written to them, but we talked about how these letters were universalized. We did that, I think, in chapter 1 or 2, maybe, chapter 2. So yeah, he is doing a forensic evaluation of us today. There's things we're doing well. There's things we need to get busy at. All right, let's see where we're at here. I'm going to give you a 15-minute break, and I want you to preview chapter 4. So that was a kind of prep work before we dive into the throne room scene in chapter 4, which we will do after the break. So we already know the letters are a Reeve covenant lawsuit. Chapter 4 and 5 moves to the judgment piece. We've had the indictment, so we'll get that in 15 minutes. So take a break and then familiarize yourself with chapter 4. Okay, well now we're going to dive into chapter 4. So here's what we're going to talk about. This is what we're going to cover. John repurposes imagery of the cherubim in Ezekiel 1, the encounter with God at Sinai in Exodus 19, the seraphim imagery of Isaiah 6, and the rainbow of Genesis 9. The vision of the cherubim chariot throne, it's called a Merkabah, not sure where the accent goes because I'm looking in English and it doesn't have accent marks on it. But Merkabah of Ezekiel 1. And we're going to talk about astral prophecy. This comes up a lot in the book of Revelation, and it's in Ezekiel chapter 1. So we're going to get exposed to that. And some of this is a little detailed, but that's where we're going. I'll try to help you stay with me. Okay, here we go. Got to hold it high. Yay! In Ezekiel 1, we get cherubim imagery, and in Isaiah 6, we get seraphim imagery. Okay, you're going to get fire in Isaiah 6 and Ezekiel 1. John is casting a throne room scene in Revelation chapter 4 through 5 with elements from Daniel 7, Ezekiel 1, and Isaiah 6. 3 divine council scenes. Those scenes reinforce the idea of God's sovereign rule and his oversight. Basically, God is ultimately judge of all things. So as you read Revelation 4, and you guys were doing that during the break, hopefully some of you read it. If you did, you saw right away, you saw parts of Ezekiel 1, parts of Isaiah 6, parts of Daniel 7. Okay, it's not only these 3 passages that are in Revelation 4 and 5, but these are the 3 primary ones. So what you have here is an amalgamation of various, very obvious divine council scenes. Revelation 4:1, verse 1, the heavenly courtroom, the heavenly throne room where God lives. Now, where else does God live in the Old Testament? You Between Two Edens folks should know this. Siri, be quiet. She was buzzing and talking at me. So where else does God live in the Old Testament? Tabernacle. Gardens. Why do the gods live in gardens? Yeah, Garden of Eden, but why? Why would you find God in a garden? So the garden would be his home. You said another word there. Mountain? Yeah. So in the Old Testament, the gods lived on mountains and in gardens. You live on a mountain because it's distant and remote. It's high above the people. The people can't get there. They didn't have rock climbing equipment 3,500 years ago. They didn't have thermal sleeping bags and hiking boots and gear. People did not climb mountains. The gods lived up on the mountains. And then gardens, plush, tropical gardens. Why would the gods live in the gardens? Because it has water. The gods live there because it has food. It's got an abundance. It's paradise. It's not a desert. So, we've got gods living on mountains because they're remote. They live in gardens because they're plush. So this cosmic mountain is a huge theme in the Old Testament and in ancient religions in the Mesopotamian area. And we're going to draw on all of that stuff here in Revelation chapter 4. And verse 1 says, "The first voice which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet." Okay, we're going to do a little rabbit trail here. I said that we're not going to focus on end-time systems. We're not teaching systems here. We're not teaching pre-mill or post-mill or a-mill or any system. All systems cheat. But I'm going to pick on some systems from time to time. And I'm going to pick on a system here right now. So, notice that that verse does not say that a trumpet sounded. John hears what? He hears a voice speaking to him. And the voice sounds like a trumpet. It's not a trumpet. It's a voice. It's a loud voice. This verse provides zero connection to the presumed rapture passages. It's not even a trumpet. It's not a shofar either. It's a voice. So a voice like a trumpet actually has an Old Testament precedent. Another sidebar. Those who hold to the pre-tribulational rapture view say, well, this must be the rapture. Because first they're thinking a trumpet sounded. But we just said, no, it wasn't a trumpet that sounded. It was a voice that sounded like a trumpet. And then second, they add this. Well, it must be the rapture because, well, the church, they argue, is absent from the rest of the book of Revelation. Here's what they mean. The word translated church in Greek is ekklesia. And that word doesn't appear once you get out of chapter 4 all the way to the end of the book. But guess what? While ekklesia does not occur, guess what word does occur? The term holy ones, which is hagios in Greek. It's translated saints in the New Testament. It occurs 13 times. And it is a frequent designation for the church in the New Testament. So, it's misguided to say that after Revelation chapter 4 verse 1, with a voice like a trumpet, that the church is gone. And that must indicate the rapture because the church is taken off the earth. Well, no. The fact that ekklesia doesn't occur doesn't mean anything because holy ones, hagios, saints, occurs 13 times going forward in the rest of the book. So it's really just not a good argument for a pre-trib rapture at that point. All right. Besides that, go back to Revelation chapter 1 and verse 10. What do you got? A loud voice like a trumpet. Guess what? It's the exact same Greek phrase as in chapter 4 verse 1. And verse 12, then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. In verse 13, it's the one like a son of man who's the one who was speaking. So this is the deity Christ figure. That's whose voice this is. It's Jesus' voice. So in 1:10 and 4:1, you have the same voice. And nobody says there's a rapture in chapter 1, verse 10. So why would we have a rapture in chapter 4, verse 1? Same voice, same exact Greek phrase. Right? So a loud voice like a trumpet doesn't prop up or support any specific end-time system. And like I said, we're going to stay away from end-time systems, and we're just going to go to the text. We're going to stick to the text. All right. Un writes of the trumpet metaphor. It says different metaphors are used to capture the loudness of voices. The sound of these voices is compared to the blast of a trumpet, to the sound of thunder, or to the sound of roaring water. The sound of a trumpet, as Larry just pointed out a minute ago, the shofar, was part of the Sinai theophany. According to Exodus 19:16 and chapter 20, verse 18. So what happens in Exodus 19 and 20? Okay, God is on Mount Sinai. It's following the Exodus, 10 plagues coming out of Egypt. Israel's about to receive the law. They're about to enter into a covenant with God. And so Un says, did that switch? Okay, good. The trumpet in theophonic context, okay, the word theophonic means appearance of God. So theophany, the appearance of God. The use of the shofar in religious settings could therefore be considered the imitation of the voice of Yahweh. The use of trumpets in Israel was designed to make the people think of the voice of God at Sinai that sounded like a trumpet in terms of its volume. So that's how they imitated or they mimicked God's voice. It was designed to call to their minds, hey, we're Israel, and God entered into a covenant with us. We have the law, and we should be following the law. So it was purposeful and designed to take the people back and remind them of entering into this covenant at Sinai with God. Un says in Greco-Roman religious text, the voice of Athena is compared to a trumpet. And in another text, thunder is called the trumpet of Zeus. So you definitely have a hearkening back to Sinai with this trumpet. Now the point is not that the voice in Revelation 4 is calling people back into the old covenant. The point is, this is Jesus. This is the risen Son of Man, who's also portrayed in Revelation chapter 1 as the Ancient of Days. So this is the risen Christ, the Lord, the one who is on the throne. Cookie point? It's God speaking. Voice like a trumpet is God speaking. That's why the trumpet imagery is used. And if you're Greco-Roman and you're thinking of Athena or Zeus, no, that's not the voice that we're paying attention to here. It's the God of Israel. It's the risen Christ, the one who is God in the flesh, who was and is to come. That's what the trumpet imagery serves to do. So, this is Jesus speaking as God with the authority of God. And just as God's words to Moses at Mount Sinai was precipitated by the sound of a trumpet from the glory cloud, that's Exodus 19, 13, 16, 19, Exodus 20, 18. In those verses, you get a sound of a trumpet from a glory cloud, and it's precipitating dialogue that God has with Moses. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 10, it's the resurrected Christ, excuse me, who is alive forevermore, who has the keys to death and Hades, and he is the one who's going to judge the living and the dead. So the point is, listen up. Okay, that's the whole point of the trumpet. And you miss all of that if you see the word trumpet and you're going, oh, wait, it's the rapture. No, it's not. Verses 2 and 3. Behold, a throne stood in heaven with one seated on the throne, and he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian, and around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of emerald. The throne and its occupant, it's pretty obvious here. It's the Ancient of Days, it's God. Its association is with Daniel 7, Isaiah 6, Ezekiel 1, 1 Kings 22. Now the gemstones. Okay, this is new information. The first two gemstones are found in descriptions of the New Jerusalem when we get to chapter 22. That's the dwelling place of God, his council, and believers, which makes sense because you have a throne in heaven. So the first two gemstones are also used in the Septuagint, Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, for the tabernacle. So it creates a link back to other sacred spaces, back to other houses of God. Sacred space is space that is fit for God's presence. So the first gemstone is also used in the description of Eden, Genesis 2:12. So there again, we've got another connection back to other cosmic abodes of God, sacred spaces, houses of God. Un, writing on the gemstones, says, Jewish apocalyptic literature do not usually use precious stones as metaphors for the throne of God. However, the throne vision in Ezekiel 1 mentions several precious stones and metals. Did it switch? Didn't think so. There we go. So, Un says, to a certain extent, John uses the precious stones drawn from the description of the heavenly Jerusalem in describing God and his throne. 3 precious stones are used in the throne room scene and in the description of the New Jerusalem: jasper, carnelian, and crystal. Sapphire is used in the description of the throne in Ezekiel chapter 1 and also occurs in Revelation 21:19. So this gemstone imagery is often going to be describing places where God lives. Okay, gemstones, God's abode. Sacred space, gemstones, where God lives, gemstones, God's house. That's it. Heiser points out that in Ezekiel 28, that these stones are not the stones in the breastplate of the high priest. They don't match. It's about the dwelling place of God, which in Ezekiel 28 would make great sense because there they're talking about, he's looking back to Eden and the garden mountain of God. The garden mountain of God, Eden, sacred space, space fit for God to dwell in. By the way, where is the sacred space that God dwells in today? We're indwelt by the Holy Spirit. We've been made fit for God's presence. Sacred space. He dwells within us. All right. So let's talk about the rainbow. That also has Old Testament precedent. So Un comments, the rainbow is an allusion to the throne vision in Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 27 and 28. Okay, this is where you get the divine man on the throne in Ezekiel 1 with the wheels vision. We only see him from the waist down. 27 says, verse 27, and there was brightness around him, like the appearance of a bow. Did you catch that? Like a bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain. What kind of bow is in the cloud on the day of rain? A rainbow, yeah. All right, so this brightness around the one seated on the throne, think of an ark. Un says the rainbow's possibly an allusion to Ezekiel 1, 27, 28, in the cloud on the day of rain. Yeah, I think so. So where John has God enthroned as a man, but there's more to it than that. All right, in the Septuagint, Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the word for rainbow in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 28, is not the same word that we see in Revelation chapter 4. However, we do get the same Ezekiel throne room vision later on in Ezekiel chapter 10, which does use the same word from Revelation chapter 4. So that connection is legitimate. All right. Now the description in Ezekiel 1 about the throne being surrounded by brightness, if you interpret that there's brightness encircling the one seated on the throne, it's a rainbow. So Ezekiel 1's definitely in play here. However, maybe when you heard rainbow, you thought of Noah and Genesis chapter 9 after the flood. Well, that's also on the table. It's a possibility. So Beale writes about this. He says the rainbow shows that God, even as judge, will be gracious to his true people. The rainbow is a sign of the promise that I am not going to destroy all life on earth again. Remember what he promised Noah? Someone said it. We'll come to that in a minute. Beale was saying this rainbow idea might signal to the readers of Revelation, hey guys, look, it is gonna be bad. But God's not gonna destroy everybody. He's not gonna destroy everyone. The righteous will be saved. See, that rainbow takes their mind back to the flood in Genesis. And it gives them some hope that even though it's going to be bad, it's going to be terrible, the righteous will be delivered. So Laszlo Galus, in the throne motif in the book of Revelation, writes, in Ezekiel 1:28, the divine splendor is likened to a rainbow. In Revelation 4:3, John sees a rainbow encircling the throne, emerald in appearance. So the rainbow imagery introduces the theme of covenant. They're just reiterating the same idea. He's gonna honor his covenant. He's not going to destroy all life again. So think of the rainbow as a sign of the covenant. That's exactly what Beale was talking about by referencing Genesis 9. So God makes a covenant with Noah. And you have this same thematic overlap. All right, Revelation chapter 4. We've got a divine courtroom scene. It parallels Daniel 7 in 14 ways in the same order. Daniel 7, God and his council decree and executes the fate of empires opposed to his people. So John, he's going to use Daniel 7 beast imagery in several passages for God's enemy, and yet the people of God are going to be under persecution. As things go forward towards the climax at the end, it gets bad, and it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. I said this a few weeks ago. There were more martyrs in the previous century than the 19 centuries before that added together. Just because it's not bad here doesn't mean it's not bad on earth for God's people. The heavens, the earth themselves are going to melt away. 2 Peter. It's an apocalypse. People are going to get hurt. People are going to get harmed. They're going to get killed. So commentators see the rainbow as a reminder that God's not going to destroy all flesh. There will be a surviving remnant. God's enemies will be destroyed forever. Now that could be everlasting torment, or it just simply could be annihilation, because both are forever. So there's some debate about that. But God's children will not be destroyed. So the rainbow imagery has theological importance. God said he would never destroy all flesh again. Well, so this is just Rafe's personal view here. I'm not necessarily tracking with these scholars on this. Genesis 9 said God would never destroy all flesh by water. He didn't say anything about fire. The elements will melt. 2 Peter and Revelation speak of a total decreation event, an event beyond the flood of Noah's day. So, I don't know, I just have a hard time seeing anybody survive that. The day of the Lord, the final day of the Lord. It is a total reset button. It's like when you reboot your computer. Screen goes off, everything goes black, and then there's a recreation. We do that at our house a lot. We're rebooting a lot. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13. I don't want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep. I don't have this one on a slide, sorry. That you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who've fallen asleep. For we declare to you by the word from the Lord that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who've fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with the cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the toot-toot-loo sound of a trumpet. The trumpet of God. And what? The dead in Christ will rise first, and then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the air to meet the Lord in the air. As the Lord's coming down to decreate the creation. So, yeah, we're not on the earth at the moment because we've just been caught up. That's not a rapture, that's the second coming. Those who are alive will, the dead in Christ rise first. Those who are alive, probably not many, in the flash, in a twinkling of an eye, you'll be changed. You meet the Lord in the air. He's coming down with the sword out of his mouth. You're on white stallions behind him with supernatural beings, and it is Armageddon. We'll get to that in chapter 19. Well, actually, we're going to get to it like 4 or 5 times because we're just going to, but yeah. So, once all believers are caught up to meet the returning Christ, we have the conclusion of the day of the Lord. And it just seems that everybody's toast. Like nobody's going to survive that. However, I just need to let you know, some commentators say it's not going to be total annihilation. It's going to be bad, but it's not going to be total. Now, whenever we die, we've got resurrection to life. So those who are loyal to Christ, who die in Christ, who maintain their believing loyalty to the end, who are conquerors, who overcome, who remain steadfast, who persevere, we will be raised to life. And we're going to be with the Lord forever. In God's house. A new global Eden. So God is going to remember his covenant regardless of how you view the covenant. All right. So Revelation chapter 4, verses 4 through 8 again. We've got 24 elders clothed in white garments. They've got golden crowns on their heads. From the throne comes flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder. Before the throne, we've got 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. A sea of glass like crystal before the throne. And around the throne are 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. Following that, you get the holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, which is coming right out of Isaiah chapter 6. So the white garments and the crowns we've already covered. We did that in Revelation 2:17, 3, 4, and 5, and 3:18. mid-message cookie shelf. White garments, required dress for divine council members. Membership or belonging to those who overcome. It's about your belonging. You're part of God's family. You're part of the new divine council. Crown, victory, royal authority, shared rulership. Now we're going to talk about this lightning and thunder and rumbling. It's a Sinai theophany in relation to the trumpet sound. So that takes us right back to Exodus 19. Also there you've got the storm and earthquake elements. Revelation 4:5, from the throne came lightning and rumbling and thunder. 8:5, thunder, rumbling, lightning, and earthquake. 11:19, there's lightning and rumbling and thunder, earthquake, and great hail. Revelation 16, lightning, rumbling, and thunder, a great earthquake, and great hail. So, Un says that the storm phenomena clearly forms the core of all four of those lists. In 11:19 and in 16:18 to 21, they're virtually identical. The storm phenomena are often associated with theophany, appearance of God, in the Old Testament. So this storm phenomena, lightning, rumbling, thunder, grew out of a narrative of the Sinai appearance of God, Exodus 19, 16, and 18. In that text, 5 phenomena are mentioned: thunder, lightning, a thick cloud, a loud trumpet blast, and an earthquake. In Revelation chapter 4, verse 5, you've got 7 spirits of fire who are identified with torches of fire, and you also have fire imagery at Sinai. Sinai, that was God's dwelling place. It was a mountain. It was his home. So fire is a stock element for divine presence. Think of the burning bush. Moses sees actually the angel of Yahweh and Yahweh are both in the bush. That's that 2 powers in heaven that we've talked about. All right, so Un writes, 7 torches of fire. Okay, if none of this has been confusing yet, it's going to get a little bit confusing here for the next 2 minutes. So just hang with me. We'll try to get some cookies for you when we get through it. All right. The view in early Judaism is that angels were made of fire. Angels were stars. They were celestial beings, but they were also made of fire. So it is possible that the 7 torches and 7 eyes in Revelation 4:5 are angelic beings, which would all be part of the 7 spirits before the throne of God. And the eyes of the Lord stuff that we talked about in chapter 1. Or the 7 blazing torches could represent a menorah lampstand, the 7 strands on one menorah lamp. So if it's the menorah view, well, it takes us back to Zechariah chapter 4. We did a lot of work in Zechariah chapter 4. So the 7 spirits and the eyes of the Lord being supernatural beings in that text. So this connection with the fire imagery with supernatural beings means this is the picture of divine beings around the throne. The fire image would be seraphim. Seraphim are throne guardians. Now I'm not going to go off into this, but if you did Between Two Edens, when we talked about the original rebel in Genesis chapter 3, the Had Nakash, that word meant serpent, and in Egyptian, the drawings on Egyptian walls, the flying throne guardians were flying serpents. What was the judgment? You'll crawl on your belly, you'll no longer fly, flying serpent. It can also mean a diviner. What does a diviner do? They give divine knowledge. did God really say you will die if you eat of that fruit? I have some knowledge for you. It also means shining, glimmering one. So it's a triple entendre, the most beautiful creature that God had made. Okay, so that's a little side. All right. So Un quotes a couple of pseudepigrapha texts. This is Second Temple material that mentions countless beings constituted of flame and fire who stand around the throne of God. So the host of angels or angelic beings or divine beings who stand before God's throne and at his command are changed to wind and fire. So this is the way that supernatural throne guardians are described in the Bible. Sometimes the imagery is being pulled from different places. Sometimes it's a Babylonian context. Sometimes it's an Egyptian context. Okay, seraphim in Isaiah 6 is an Egyptian context. And so they're likely serpentine in appearance. Comes from the noun seraph. So when it's a noun, it's translated serpent. When it's a verb, it means to burn. And then it would be a fiery one. So what is a burning, what kind of serpent might be considered a fiery serpent because something about it might burn? Well, a dragon, yeah, that'd be a good one. Cobra, a spitting cobra, right? Yeah, so that's how that was typically drawn in their on their things that we have archaeologically uncovered. All right. So a guy named Provencal, it's a weird name. This doesn't sound like a name. I'm behind? Okay, thank you. I need help. There we go. Yeah, how would you pronounce that? Provencal? All right, so we'll go with that. So this guy, Provencal, in his study on seraph, says that its language is drawn from Egyptian religion where spitting cobras that had this fiery venom would guard the throne of the deity. So the seraph idea, seraphim, is of a throne guardian protecting sacred space, protecting the deity from defilement. So it's probably best for us to see the imagery here as a both and kind of thing. It's a fiery serpent who is also a supernatural being. That's kind of the way the original rebel in Genesis 3 was put forth. You also get fire or flaming torches in passages like Exodus 3, where you got the burning bush. You've got the pillar of fire in the Exodus wanderings, that pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day. Deuteronomy 33:2, you get either a fiery law or fire associated with a multitude of heavenly hosts that at Sinai in the giving of the law. Another place, God sends fire from heaven. Where did God send fire from heaven? Remember that? Is it up there? Sodom and, oh, it is. It's in blue. Sodom and Gomorrah. Psalm 104 says he makes his messengers winds and his ministers a flaming fire. Remember, they're turned into wind and fire. So there's a lot of Old Testament imagery that uses fire to add to the serpentine imagery. So it's kind of a both and. All right. Well, guess what? We've got all these elements in Revelation chapter 4. And they can all be found with God's presence at Sinai, except for the serpentine piece. That's not at Sinai. But it's a very clear association with Sinai because Sinai is where God lives. Now, it doesn't mean it's not associated with Ezekiel 1, because Ezekiel 1 has all this imagery too. And then there's even more that's being looped into Revelation 14. You see, John doesn't just go to one passage. He winds up drawing from 4 or 5 different places. He combines the things. It's an amalgamation of things. He puts them all in a blender, and then this is what we get. Now, If you look at the creatures that surround the throne in verses 6 through 8, these are cherubim. This is from Ezekiel 1. Seraphim or Isaiah 6. Cherubim or Ezekiel 1. But the wings are numbered at 6. Okay, if you go to Ezekiel 1, they don't have 6 wings. There, the cherubim have 4 wings. Well, the 6 count comes from Isaiah 6, where you have seraphim. So now you got cherubim with the 6 wings of the seraphim. John's just combining stuff. He's mixing and matching. He's like, I'll take those pants from that model and the shirt from over here and this tie from over there. You know, he's making some modifications. So in Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10, the cherubim are not they're not full of eyes. The eyes and the things full of eyes are the wheels. It's the wheels that have the eyes, not the cherubim. But in Revelation 4, it doesn't call them cherubim and it doesn't call them seraphim. What does it call them? Living creatures. And it's the living creatures who are full of eyes. All right, what's John doing here? Why is he combining all these things in Revelation 4 and 5? Well, what he is doing is actually conceptually consistent with Ezekiel 1. Okay, Isaiah 6 has some of these elements. God does have throne guardians in Isaiah 6, but it's an Egyptian context there. So let's track on Ezekiel 1. Now, I gave you a one-page article on this to read about astral prophecy. So John's got something he wants to communicate here in Revelation chapter 4 and 5. Basically, he wants you to know God's enemies are going to get judged. The nations are going to get judged. The wicked are all going to get judged because God is sovereign. So that's the conceptual point that is conveyed in Ezekiel 1, but he's using astronomical imagery from the Babylonian religion. Ezekiel 1, remember, where's Judah in exile? In Babylon. So they're familiar with the Babylonian astrology. So Ezekiel 1 very clearly points to the Babylon zodiac and astral imagery to make a very specific point about who controls time and history. Okay, here's your cookie. The whole point of this very confusing thing I'm going to try to explain to you is who controls time and history. Yeah, now let's see how John tries to communicate that to you and see if we can get it. Ready? All right. So, he's saying it's not Marduk. Marduk doesn't control time and history. The God of Israel controls time and history. See, the Jews are in captivity. They're in a foreign land because of their apostasy. Now, in an ancient mindset, if you're in captivity, then your God was defeated by their God. But the point of Ezekiel 1 is no, Marduk is not in control of time and history. Your God is still the one on the throne. That is the whole point of Ezekiel chapter 1 with the spinning wheels and all the stuff that's going on there that looks wild. But it's communicated through astral prophecy, astral imagery. So I'm going to summarize it, try to do it simply. John wants to communicate. All hell is going to break loose on earth. It is going to be terrible. The righteous will suffer. You remember what the flood was like? Well, God saved a remnant. He promised He wouldn't annihilate everyone again. So it could be that there will be a remnant that's saved. But even if most of the righteous die, and of course I've already read you the passage, we're going to be caught up in the air. There's not going to be any righteous on the earth, I don't think. But even if there were, and most of them died before Jesus returns, we'll all be resurrected, so we'll be with Him. We're going to be with the Lord at the end. John's reminding them of that. But he's also reminding them of the teaching point of Ezekiel 1. The God of Israel is the one in control of the cycles of time and of history. So, we're in a divine council meeting. The council meets to begin unleashing God's judgment upon the earth. The wicked will be punished. The righteous will be vindicated. The martyrs will be avenged. Supernatural powers will be destroyed, and the nations will ultimately be healed. But in the course of doing all that, it's going to get bad. But finally, Eden is going to return to earth. But this is the day of the Lord time. And just as Ezekiel 1, that imagery conveyed cosmic sovereignty, well, so does John. And that's what John's trying to communicate to us through Revelation 4 and 5. And so there's the conceptual overlap. He's just throwing all this stuff together. You know, whether you put it in a blender, you're making goulash, or whatever it is, it's everything mixed together. It's a salad, it's a fruit salad, all kinds of fruit. All right, little rabbit trail here on Ezekiel 1. Heiser writes, Ezekiel's vision included wheels within wheels, whose rims were tall and awesome and full of eyes. So scholar Daniel Block notes that the eyes in the Ezekiel 1 passage were earlier said to sparkle and to gleam. So sparkling and gleaming are familiar descriptions for stars throughout ancient literature. Stars sparkle and gleam. Block writes, the four faces of the cherubim in Ezekiel's vision correspond to the four signs for the four cardinal direction points, north, south, east, and west. Block says that these compass points correspond to what the Babylonians were trying to communicate by having a zodiac. The heavenly throne scene in Revelation 4 and 5 borrows this terminology and other things from Ezekiel 1 to describe heavenly creatures, supernatural beings, full of eyes in front and behind. Another scholar named Pilch, in his Revelation commentary writes, the ancients described stars, specifically constellations, as animals or creatures full of eyes. The terminology for eyes also being gleaming and sparkling. Okay, well, in Ezekiel 1, they were rims, right? Okay, rims are what? They're circles. They're things that go in circles. Wheels go in circles. The zodiac goes in circles. So the ancients called eyes, stars eyes, they called stars eyes, and they thought they were living entities. Constellated stars, called full of eyes, were perceived to be animate beings like persons or animals. So what Ezekiel sees is all four constellations moving at once. And his vantage point is above the entire cosmos, looking down on it. Here's what it is. So Ezekiel chapter 1 is describing the heavenly throne or the chariot of Yahweh, God's throne chariot. It's supported by cherubim, these winged creatures, and it had wheels. Wheels inside wheels that had eyes. So this is the way, in the ancient context you described, the throne of a deity. Oops. Pilch continues, like typical ancient throne chariots known from sculpture and other art, Yahweh's throne, his Merkabah, is surrounded and supported by cherubim, And since Yahweh's throne is in the heavens, these cherubim are quite naturally part of the visual sky. Ezekiel's seeing the constellations move through the heavens in their regular cyclical path. Wheels are circles. The wheels within wheels is a way of symbolically describing the stars. It's the constellations in their courses. So what do stars and constellations do? What's their purpose? They mark time. Back one, thank you. There we go. So Ezekiel's vision, this is the right one, proclaims to the captives from Judah exiled in Babylon that the heavenly king who controls the cycles of time and history is not Marduk, it's not the Babylonian god, it's not the chief deity of Babylon, but it is Yahweh, the chief deity of Israel. All right. So Pilch in his commentary, John is using this cherubim imagery and describes living creatures filled with eyes. And in his context, in the eyes that are in the Ezekiel passage, it seems pretty clear he's describing the constellations in the heavens, which is where God lives, where God is enthroned. And John's messaging is the same as the messaging in Ezekiel 1. God is in control of time and history. He and his council they're about to make that very evident, very clear as they render judgment throughout the rest of the book of Revelation. So, John's communicating the same message. God's on the throne, the Lamb, the risen Christ, who's described as the Ancient of Days, who in Daniel 7 is on the throne. All these things they converge and they merge together. You got a voice like a trumpet, you got fire, you got jewels, you got white clothes, you got the gemstones, God's presence. All this stuff is drawn from divine council imagery, and it's drawn from the place where God lives, from the throne of God, which is in the heavens. So if we look up at the heavens and we see creatures that move in circles, cycles of time, it's telling you who is in control of time and history. It's the one who sits on thrones. It's kings. And who is the king of time and the passage of time and of history? For John, it's Yahweh. So this plays out with nations and geopolitical entities and people. And who's in control of all those things? The passage of time, history, nations, people. It's God. It's Christ. It's the Lamb. It's the Son of Man. It's the Ancient of Days. So that's why John is doing what he's doing with this imagery. All right. 24 elders. We're going to talk about that next week. But are the 24 elders another piece of astral prophecy? Well, there's several possibilities here. So does the number 24 have astral significance? Is it related to the tribes of Israel or to the apostles? Is it more related generally to the great cloud of witnesses in Hebrew chapter 12, talking about human believers becoming part of the divine council? Those are things we will talk about next time. So, let's do our final cookies. Cherubim and seraphim, they're throne room guardians. They guard the throne. They protect the deity from defilement. Loud voice like a trumpet, shofar. It's there to represent the voice of Yahweh. It's God who's speaking. For the Jews at Sinai, it was a reminder of the covenant that they entered into with God. But for us, it's the risen Christ, the one who is God in the flesh, who was and is to come. The Ancient of Days, the one on the throne. So the voice, the trumpet, the sound, the voice like a trumpet this is God speaking. That's what it means. The gemstones, sacred spaces, houses of God, dwelling of God. Rainbow could be a sign of the covenant. God will be gracious in judgment, potentially saving a remnant, but definitely resurrection for all believers. Fire is a metaphor for Yahweh's presence, divine presence. The storm phenomena, lightning, rumbling, thunder, earthquake, it's a Sinai appearance of God. It means it's an appearance of God. It's God's presence. 7 torches of fire before the throne. The text said that these are the 7 spirits of God. These are supernatural beings around the throne. Seraphim, cherubim, throne guardians. Also could be a little bit of the fiery law that is in there. We touched on that briefly. Constellations, cherubim, and so eyes. Their eyes, full of eyes, stars. Is supported by animate beings, so cherubim and seraphim supporting Yahweh's throne chariot. Wheels within wheels, those are stars, those are the constellations in their courses. The rims are things that go in circles, wheels go in circles, the zodiac goes in a circle. It's the moving constellations. Creatures with wheels and eyes, it's the heavenly throne chariot of Yahweh. God's throne chariot, Yahweh is in control of time and history. All right, what's the point? Well, when it gets bad, remember who's in control, who's in charge of time and history. The earth is going to be decreated and then recreated. It's a total reset. The wicked are going to be punished for their treatment of God's people. Believers will be avenged. There will be collateral damage. But the righteous, those with believing loyalty to the end, will be saved. We will gain access to a new Eden, and we will share in Christ's ruling authority. So the charge is the same one that was in chapter 2, same one that was in chapter 3, really chapter 1 as well. Stay on mission. Don't fall away. Don't become complacent. Don't switch sides. Rekindle your first love. That is it. All right. There was a lot of very much detailed stuff in there. I got confused. But the bottom line was real simple. Yahweh is in charge of time and history. The world, He is going to bring judgment. Believers will be vindicated. The wicked will be judged. And He's going to pour out His judgment on the earth. That was the point. So, Father, I just thank You for each one here. Lord, I pray that as we wrestle with the truth of Your word, that we would see where we need to focus as individuals with our lives to be faithful, to be those who remain loyal to You, who remain active, who take the warnings of the letters to the 7 churches, and the areas in our life where we need to focus to be obedient and to live rightly before You. And then, Lord, we need Your grace to do that. And we thank You that Your grace is unending. It is always flowing. And so give us wisdom, give us guidance, give us a prodding. And then, Lord, bear fruit through us, fruit that will echo all the way into eternity. In Jesus' name, amen.